Welcome to our broadcast. James Earl Jones has perhaps the most distinctive voice in America, certainly in American theater. But when he was growing up in rural Michigan, Jones was virtually mute. The trauma of moving from Mississippi to Michigan was overwhelming, and he developed a paralyzing stutter. Voices and Silences is the two-time Tony winner's autobiography. It was written with Penelope Niven. From Othello to The Great White Hope to Fences, James Earl Jones has given performances as powerful as any on Broadway over the past 25 years. And we're pleased to have him here for this hour to reflect on his life and his career and those things that have influenced him in an extraordinary life. Welcome.
I'm pleased to have another chance to talk to you.
Thank you.
Especially after you've been talking to all the world leaders, and you find time to talk to somebody who's written a book about whatever.
Well, listen, I mean, we try to talk to world-class people here.
Okay.
That's our guiding motive, our guiding vision for the program. It is an extraordinary time in Washington.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
You know, I mean, to see and feel, we did, for those of you who don't know, we had a conversation last night with two of the principals involved in this Mideast Accord between the PLO and Israel, to see the passion and the sense of just some connection that people have after a 40-year struggle in life and having lost people and having gone through what they've been, and to be at this moment on the world stage with everybody watching. It had more drama than I can ever think I'll ever see again.
Do you think that it feels too good to be true, that a lot of people are just suspicious that it's working at all?
Well,
they're suspicious.
Shimon Peres, in an interview with me, talked about that this was like a galloping horse. This is name-dropping like crazy. He said that Francois Mitterrand had said that history sometimes is like a galloping horse, and that when you have to grab it, whatever the consequences. What it also does, it creates expectations, as you can imagine, as to where that horse may go, and not knowing what fences and what kinds of terrain you may run into that will derail the rider, at least. So it's an extraordinary time. But it's also great to have you here, especially after you have put together and put, along with Penelope Niven, a sense of one's life.
Penny is also the latest biographer of Carl Sandburg. That book preceded this one.
Yeah. Eight Fella, North Carolinian.
Yes, right.
From the mountains, and I'm from the Piedmont. Their poetry was important to you at an early age, and it saved your life. Let me get to that, but let me just go back, way back, to growing up in Mississippi. When you were there, your father had returned before you were born to New York.
No, we were all Southerners, and my father and my mother split. There was a bad marriage. And before I was born, and my father was by then a prize fighter, not an actor yet. And
this was in the 30s, or later.
Yes, the Depression was devastating everybody. But he decided to try his fortunes in the East, so he traveled by freight train, hoboing, it was called then, and ended up in Jersey City, New Jersey. And there's a photograph of him in the New York News photo gallery. He's in a boxing ring. Yeah. And somebody has his hands raised in victory. Didn't wait for the referee and it's my father. But you can barely recognize him. His face is so bloodied. Yeah. That's kind of the image we used in The Great White Hope too. That even though a victor.
Yeah, you remember that that photograph?
Oh, my father
when you were playing Jack Jefferson.
Oh, yeah.
You, he later became an actor, though, and did he do some sparring with Joe Louis?
That's how he became an actor.
During World War II?
He realized that doing these USO movies, which Joe did a lot of them, that you could fake a lot of the blows. You didn't get hit as hard as often.
So he said acting is better than fighting. I mean, he could have made a whole career with Sly Stallone.
Yes.
Your grandparents then raised you.
Yeah, they were
on your mother's side.
People, yeah. John Henry and Maggie Connolly.
How many brothers and sisters?
I had none. I now have an adopted brother, Matthew. Yeah. But I was an only child until Matt's adoption, but I was tagged on to the main family. I was more or less adopted by Maggie and John. I call them Papa and Mama. Yeah. And so my youngest uncle, Randy, was only 4 years older than I was. So he was like, we're like brothers, really.
Yeah. And you moved to Michigan when you were what?
I was 4.5. Yeah.
It was traumatic for you?
I didn't realize how traumatic it was until I returned to Mississippi when I was 40 years old. So we're talking about 35 years later. And I realized the warmth that I felt about that place, which I did not expect. I thought I would think of Mississippi in the social, political terms. No, as a child, I thought of it only in the pure Huck Finn terms. You know, it was the land my bare feet was on, and I loved it. And I realized what I had lost when I returned to it. And I began to put together the elements of the trauma that led to stuttering. You know, after that.
You started stuttering when you were how old?
Well, when I arrived in Michigan.
When you arrived in Michigan, which was...
That should have been a clue.
You just found yourself unable to speak?
Well, it's very complex. Stuttering is not dissimilar from, I guess, medically, from petite mal epilepsy. Things trip in the brain so that the speech mechanism trips over itself. But I used to imitate Uncle Randy, Duke we called him, was a stutterer for a while. He also had petite mal epilepsy. Yeah. I used to imitate him, mock him, we used to say. And so in a way I was cursed for mocking him. Then when my own trauma set in, this was sitting there waiting for me, like, you want a place to hide?
Yeah,
here it is.
Here it is.
Muteness.
And what was it like? I mean, you were eloquent in talking about the need for expression.
You learn that when you can't talk. It's not that you yearn to talk so much, but you appreciate those who can, you know. And
because you have ideas and feelings you want to give voice to?
You think you do, yeah. Your feelings mainly. Ideas I'm not so sure about.
Your feelings, emotion.
But you have your feelings, you have convictions, feelings that you want to share. And so as an actor, I ended up being able to share those spoken through other characters, you know.
So that might have shaped you in some way as an actor, you think, that time?
Oh, yeah.
In what way?
The appreciation for expression. Even though it's not mine, it doesn't matter. Because I learned to speak through reading my own poetry and also other poetry. You know.
Tell me that time that the teacher, the former college professor, who's your high school teacher.
Great man.
What was his?
Crouch.
Crouch.
Yeah, Donald Crouch.
Yes. He read your poem.
Mennonite. Yeah.
Which was an ode to a grapefruit?
I wrote this ode based heavily on Longfellow.
Yeah.
Longfellow's rhythms, who based his on the Finlandia and the epics, you know. Hiawatha and Finlandia and the Ode to Grapefruit are very strongly connected rhythmically. And Donald said, Jim, I don't believe you, this poem is so good, I don't believe you wrote it. And I'm accusing you of plagiarism. And the only way you can prove you wrote it is to get up in front of the class and recite it from memory. This
is a young man of 14 who had not spoken for 8 years.
I spoke, but I didn't make sense. Okay. I spoke to the dog a lot. But I had not really addressed a language before, since childhood.
And he says, I don't believe this is yours unless you can prove to me by reciting it in front of your peers.
Yeah.
And what'd you feel?
I got up and recited word for word, and we were both shocked. But we also realized we had a way for me to regain the power of speech through reading poetry.
So poetry liberated you?
Yes. And did so because, like song, poetry is rhythmic. And a lot of stutterers don't stutter when they sing. Who is it? The famous country western singer.
Johnny Cash.
I want to say Twitty, but it's not.
Well, Conway Twitty, or
the other one with the.
We'll find out. You still have moments on stage in which it's there.
It's always there. It's there right now. Stutterers often seem like they are ponderous and deep thinkers. We're not. We're just simply looking for the word we can say without tripping on it, you know. I will get a script, whether it's for TV, narration, commercial, or acting role, and I'll go through it right away and take out all the alliterations. You give me a sentence with more than 3 words beginning with vowels in a row, and it's hopeless.
So you change all your script.
Drives writers crazy, but I have to.
And if I see you in a dramatic pause on stage, it may be because the moment calls for it.
Yeah.
It may be because you're looking for command of language.
Yes, it happened to me twice. Once on stage early on in my first Broadway play. I think I had 3 lines, and one of them I stuttered on. And it happened later when I won my Tony Award for The Great White Hope. I stood there for a moment, and I acted like I didn't know what to say, but I really didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to get it out. I was angry too, because Ed Sheeran had not even received any recognition for directing something that won all the awards. How could White Hope win all the awards and the director gets no? But that was kind of political, I think, as awards tend to be. It wasn't his turn or whatever it was. But I was angry, and in those days I had a hard time masking my anger. And once I get angry, of course, I stutter too. Once I get deeply into any emotion, I stutter. And when I'm
whether it's joy or anger or any kind of
anything where where the character is overwhelmed by the emotion, I'm in deep water. Yeah, joy or fury.
When you went to the University of Michigan on scholarship, were you thinking theater then, or were you thinking?
I was thinking medicine, because Randy and I were the first members of a whole history of our families who ever went to college. There's been lots since then, but and for a farm for peasant people to choose a career was very, very crucial, that you choose one of the big 3. You know, law, medicine, engineering.
Same thing.
He chose engineering. Really?
Yeah, that's what, when I grew up, I didn't think never about television or anything. You thought about law or medicine or engineering or something like that. I mean, I thought about medicine, but then went to law school.
You were also medicine?
No, I thought about medicine. I was pre-med, but decided that I wasn't crazy about hospitals. So I decided a courtroom would be a better venue for me. So I went to law school. But it was the same thing. If you grew up in rural North Carolina, as I did, in small town North Carolina, you thought about you thought about professions. You didn't think about business. You didn't think about clearly acting or television or any of those things.
Or liberal arts as a goal.
Exactly.
No, there was not.
Accounting might have been.
You didn't have the money for that, right?
But that sounded boring.
It probably still is true for a lot of American kids. You know?
Yeah, especially if you come from a modest background, because you think about that. And those roles have a certain honor with them, I think.
Yeah.
You know.
My son, the doctor, is.
Yes, exactly. My son, the doctor.
Universal.
You go to University of Michigan, and does it what happens there?
Well, whereas science in high school was a fascinating journey, and I had good science teachers, and high school level science is graspable. Yes. And I loved it, and I thought it would be true on through college, but I found out that science, like anatomy and physics and chemistry, was force-feeding the goose, and I balked.
Me too.
Did you?
Yeah, I didn't. I wasn't crazy about it. I mean, I couldn't feel it, relate to it. It wasn't something I eagerly wanted to know about. You then, after the University of Michigan, went into the Army.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful story in which you are talking to an officer, and you are then a lieutenant.
Yeah.
And he says you can become a captain. You are thinking about what you want to do. Remember that story for me.
Well, Colonel Willoughby, one of the few names from the military, and an unusual man, because military men don't talk kids out of the Army.
Yeah, exactly.
They usually talk you in. He said, you know, I've known a lot of people who are in the Army. Alcoholism has always been a big problem. He says one of the reasons is that they have misgivings about having failed at something outside. He says I want to encourage everybody who has something they want to do outside to go out and try it. You can always come back to the Army. And I said, yeah, my dad's an actor. He says, well, do you want to be an actor? I said, kinda. He said, go try it.
You go to New York.
Go to New York.
You talk to your father.
Yeah.
You two had not obviously been close because he left before you were born.
I had met him once before I mustered out of the Army. I met him like
here we are
two
with your
years
dad.
previously. Yeah.
Yeah.
I call that picture the lion and the cub.
Now, he's having a difficult time as an actor. I mean, it's not easy for him.
I don't know.
And he has other craft as well.
I don't know how difficult time. He simply said that when I came to New York, he says, I have not been able to make a living at this business, meaning theater. And he says, I'm not saying that to deter you, but I'm saying it to set us the stage of reality. And he and I both did do other work. We were craftsmen. We sanded floors.
Carpentry and
carpentry.
Floors, yeah.
Mainly floor finishing.
You were then Todd Jones?
I was Todd Jones up through my first equity card, yes.
Yeah. And he wanted you to change to,
no,
James Earl, or did you want to? Because he was Robert Earl Jones.
No, he was Earl Jones.
Earl,
then. Yeah, he had dropped the Robert. He was blacklisted. I once asked him, why do you change your name so much? He says, well, because the last one I used didn't help me very much.
As if the name would do it.
And so by the time I came in, I had taken Todd because it is my real nickname.
Yeah.
And also in honor of the great Todd Duncan.
Right.
But I said, now that I'm in New York, I find that a lot of people want to know, am I related to Earl Jones? And I said, why don't I just go back to my real name? And he said, well, I'll consider going back to my real name. So we did.
Robert Earl Jones and James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones,
yeah. But your son is named
Flynn Earl Jones.
Flynn Earl Jones.
Yeah. Matthew chose Matthew Earl Jones for a while, his own choice to use the Earl, and I think he's abandoned that now because it doesn't help.
Where was the breakthrough? You went to acting school with Lee Strasberg, did you not?
I was at the American Theater Wing at the time. Lee was a teacher there.
Yeah.
He taught mainly directing. And a wonderful group of teachers. Nora Dunphy was there then. She's still my speech coach.
You still
Oh.
need coaching?
Except for the second try at the
Just
Vernon.
get the picture of this. This is the voice that's probably more distinctive than any in America. Still needs coaching.
Well, doesn't Capriati and all those kids...
Right.
All
Oh,
those
the
great
tennis players, of course they do.
Don't they have coaches?
Yeah, and golfers too.
Golfers,
You'll see
right.
some of the best golfers out there saying, what's happened to this swing?
Same with us. Nora was always great, and she's coached people like, my names fail me, well-known actors, right. Barbara Hershey, people like that. Right. Her talent is in giving us principles of speech that we can apply to any role, whether it's from Shakespeare, or a South African character, or Lenny and Mice and Men, or whatever,
Yeah.
Just principles of good speech. Mainly the goal is for clarity, which is always the problem with communication. You know?
Had you even then, at that early stage, developed a great love for Othello?
No.
No.
My favorite character in that play is Cassio, and I've never played it. But no, Othello is kind of more of an obligation, and probably because of my father's association with that role and his fascination with that role.
An obligation, a family obligation?
Kind of.
Or
yeah.
an obligation to the part because you do it so well in the same way that Jason Robards has an obligation to Eugene O'Neill?
Kind of like that. Yeah, I would like to think of it in that company. But also like a mountain to climb. It is there. Shakespeare wrote 3 black men that are obviously, we call them blackamoors, you know.
Yeah.
And 2 of them it's kind of easy to handle. Prince of Morocco, I did it like that when I was very young, and I have no desire to do it again. He's silly man. He was always talking about, how great it is to be black, and why you should marry me. And then Morocco, Aaron the Moor, who is another version of Iago, a very evil man, but also in the context of today's activism, he was a black activist, you might say. And then there was Othello, who was a man of love. He's the hardest to get a hold of because the play itself is the hardest to achieve.
Of all the Shakespearean characters?
No,
plays?
no. Lear was supposed to be the hardest
I know
role.
a lot of people always aspire to do Lear, but don't do it for 1,000 different reasons.
Yeah.
Maybe because it's too tough a mountain to climb.
A lot of talking.
Yeah, a lot of talking.
Yeah. So it's that mountain to climb, and I've climbed it 7 times, once effectively, I think.
Once effectively?
Yeah, only once effectively. That 1964.
One performance or one run?
One production. The one that Gladys Vaughn directed with Mitchell Ryan as Iago and Julianne Marie as Desdemona. That was the one that worked.
Now, did you meet both of your wives in Othello?
Well, the myth is that I marry all my Desdemonas.
Yes, that is the myth.
Yeah.
That's true. You did marry Julianne Marie, who
I did marry Julianne.
who you met and
after we had done
right.
the Othello.
In fact, but go ahead.
I married my present wife before we had done Othello together.
Because it did, but so you were already married to her when you did that. So that is a
Yeah.
myth that you married all your Desdemonas. Joe Papp, you were in Henry V for Joe Papp?
That was my beginning.
The first?
The first year he opened up the theater at the Delacorte Theater in the park. I'd been to see a play that Alan Schneider had done. I think it was a Carson McCullers play, Heart of the Lonely Hunter.
Yes.
I went backstage and to meet Colleen, and Roscoe Lee Brown, I think, was in it. And I saw Alan backstage. I said, Mr. Snyder, I understand you're doing Measure for Measure. Well, there's a role in it, a guy with a mask on, Ab Horson, the executioner. Now, I'm black, but, you know, with a mask, who knows who cares what I am? Yeah. Let me play Ab Horson. He has about 5 lines. Yeah. And Alan said, okay.
Okay.
Right.
But Joe Paplater said you stole the plate. He just he said that.
Did he?
He said that when you came on, it was the powerful moment of the play. I
never knew that.
Yeah.
Joe decided to use me in his production that same season of Henry V.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Then I was talking about Henry V.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Joe got a lot of commentary about that from the press because the Vietnam War was on, and it looked like he was using a black actor in that role because the black actor was challenging the king on the battlefield. And they thought
everybody thought it was another political statement by
Joe. Yeah. It wasn't that at all. Joe just wanted about a bunch of strapping guys on the stage to play. You had to explain why Henry V, with a few men, defeated the whole French army, much like General Schwarzkopf did in Desert Storm. How did so few defeat so many? And Joe said, well, let's make them strong, you know. So those longbows worked, you know. And that was his main motive. But it did catch a lot of attention because it was that kind of non-traditional casting.
When did blacks come along?
Just in time, I think. For a lot of us, black actors, I can name all the black actors of my generation that you would have heard of. And we all were sometime in that production of Jean Genet's The Blacks. Yeah. That was in the early 60s. Right around the time of the peak of the civil rights movement, I think. In fact, the bombing in the Birmingham church, I think, where the 5 little girls were killed, happened during our production, and it somehow affected our production as well.
Yeah. How instrumental was it? How was that a shaping role for you, though?
For all of us, it was. Geraldine Lust, who had the rights to the play, I think John Barry had done it in France, and it had been done in England, had never been done here. And I think The Balcony, Genet's The Balcony, had been done. And Americans didn't quite understand these avant-garde pieces too well. And Geraldine said, I'm worried that I will not find a cast of African-American actors who can all handle this language, meaning it wasn't street talk, you know. It wasn't even Shakespeare, which some of us had some training in. This is another kind of language, and I'm worried that I'm worried about finding a cast that can handle it. Well, she started out with Roscoe Lee Brown, who could handle any kind of language, and I got to be a part of that cast, and she did finally put together a cast of people that handled it very well, and it became a very important production.
And after that, Athol Fugard's The Knot.
Mm-hmm. The Blood Knot, yeah.
Yeah. And how was that?
Boy, I thought I discovered until I met August Wilson's plays. I thought I discovered, you consider yourself a vein of lead or some kind of metal, and next to you there's a vein of gold running a vein of silver. I said, how often in somebody's life would this accident happen that this playwright exists in my time, you know?
And who could give? What's it like to find that for you?
Well, it's a blessing, first of all.
Because it doesn't seem to happen very often.
No, it doesn't.
You know?
You mentioned Jason and O'Neill.
Right.
It happened in that case.
For him. And you didn't feel as comfortable in that role when you played it, did you?
In the Blood Knot?
No, when you played O'Neill, the Iceman Coming.
Not at all.
It was not what...
And it wasn't because I was black and the role was an Indiana Hoosier. I mean, there were black Indiana Hoosiers too, perhaps, but so certainly I was inventing one. But it was the psychic nature of the character. Jason was able to capture that quixotic nature of Hickey, and I'm a lethargic person. I don't have that. But the deal was that Ted Mann said, "You play this role, and I'll give you a chance to play Lenny and Mice and Men later on."
So you said yes
yeah, I did.
for that. That's a deal. Yeah, and then.
But those confluences were, I think, in writing this book, there was a period when I enjoyed doing the first half of it, which I called the origins, and Penny was very helpful because she's a master researcher. She was able to go back to Mississippi and talk to aunts and uncles and cousins that I would have been very self-conscious about. she got information from
But
them.
you did eventually go back to Michigan.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you. I mean, recently, yes.
Yeah. But that part of the book I found not easy, but it was fun. The career part I found difficult. And one day, Bob Stewart, who was then our editor, said, you know, you landed in, you see, you might have thought you were coming out of the Army confronting the kind of explosion with firearms, civil war, racial war, ethnic cleansing that we now associate with Bosnia. Right. He said, what you landed in, though, was another kind of explosion, an artistic explosion that hasn't happened. Maybe the seeds were planted back in the old group theater days where the method was first being explored. But it hasn't happened before or since. It was really a worldwide explosion of art.
Of great roles that you could...
Suddenly, theater became a place for everybody. It became very proletarian. It didn't matter whether you were black, because there were roles now that, in the avant-garde theater days, it didn't matter who was who, you know. It sort of opened up everything. And that happened in England with the Angry Young Men. You had plays written for the working class, you know. It happened in Europe with the avant-gardists, and happened here. And he said, you got to acknowledge that you're talking about, if you don't think you're unusual, you're talking about you being in an unusual time. So you got to take this book more seriously on the career side.
You've really got to dig into that. And why was it hard for you?
It's just, I think it's hard for any actor to tell what he does. It's hard for any artist to tell what he does.
You say let the art speak for itself.
Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, all that's left of the plays often are the reviews and the memories in the audience's minds. But I always felt that our lives, are, for the most part, are very simple, and hopefully they are. What we do is often very important, depending on who wrote the play. It's often very noble what we do. But we ourselves, the idea of actors doing autobiographies, always felt, well, why? Who really cares, you know? And so I had those resistances going on.
Was it cathartic to write this in any way? What was the emotional?
Great relief when it was finished.
So it wasn't that hard.
It wasn't finished. They said, stop. We've got to put it in the book, so it's stop.
We've gotten to
I read through it now, and I keep editing. When you find out that you're a halfway decent editor, you keep editing. You know, I read it now and I say, well, I want to change that. So in the paperback, I've got to change that line and so on. Yeah. That's a danger.
In 1968, The Great White Hope is brought to you. You write about the fact that it's incredible that you do not find that many great roles. I mean, you have done a lot of movies that you have done to put bread on the table, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, few memorable roles that you've had to do that some that, like Field of Dreams, that I assume, what would you be proud of? Field of Dreams, Claudine?
Oh, the movies, yeah. You're naming them right now.
Okay, those two.
The very simple movies, Matewan, Field of Dreams,
right.
Claudine, a couple on TV, the UFO incident. Right. Very simple stories. I've enjoyed the big splashy movies like Conan the Barbarian, or Coming to America, Patriot Game, but those weren't my movies.
They're cameo roles. You're not carrying those movies.
Right.
Back to The Great White Hope. When you saw that, I mean, did it speak to you? Did you say, I've got something there that's not classical that I can
I knew
run
he was,
with.
although he existed in 1915,
right.
I knew he was a fairly modern man that I can handle. And I also knew that I had to go into a discipline, a physical discipline, to get in shape. And once I started doing that, it began to affect my psyche as well. I became very lean and mean.
You did?
Yeah, but also very mean. Yeah.
Mean?
Yeah. Because Jack was mean. Jack was not we think of most black people as being probably socialist at heart, or certainly liberal at heart. Necessarily liberal, right? Until recently. But Jack was a fascist. Literally, Jack Johnson was kicked out of England for espousing German ideas, although that was not the fascist Germany, it was World War I. Right. But he was kind of unexpected. He was not a leader of his people. He resented the idea that he, as a black person, was responsible for all of being a credit to his race. He's a bull.
But you are, in some ways, similar.
I am, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, your views on race and a lot of other things and a sense of culture are not certainly what one might not the conventional wisdom with respect to
often certainly not
views.
politically correct.
Right, not politically correct is a better way of saying it.
And I don't consider myself a teacher, so therefore I would not want to get into an argument with some college student who is fighting to have his bench on a college campus that's separate from white benches, you know. But I think that's kind of silly. I really do. I think there's nothing about skin that bonds us, shocked though it may be, and though we may want it to be. We may want our skins to bond us for political reasons. And the anti-black people, the white races, might want to use it as a bonding stigma, but it does neither. There's nothing about it that bonds. And one trip to Africa can tell you that. They'll say, who the hell are you? What's your culture? What's your language? I think language is the only thing that underpins culture in the first place. And we happen to speak a version of English.
So where do you put when a group of young African-American students at a university say, you come to lecture, say, and they come and say, you know, we have to understand, appreciate, and be, you know, connected to our African culture. And it's important that we that we put that in the right perspective and it have the same context for us that European culture has for white America. What do you say to them?
We are stuck with the European culture, I'm afraid, you know, whether we like it or not. Yeah. And you can do sentimental journeys to Africa or to African culture or to the African motif and to Afrocentricism, but it is only a sentimental journey. You got to. I think it's also important that while you fight for rights, and there are rights to be fought for, you know, freedom doesn't come in your lap. While you're fighting for that, you got to save a lot of energy to also deal with, number one, with you and your family. And that has nothing to do with race. You got to save a lot of energy for that because that's where the answers really are. You know.
In your family.
Oh yeah. That's the only thing that bonds. You know. And I don't think we're unusual. I think people, white racists who get off on the fact that the white are just as foolish and just as misguided because it doesn't bond.
But would you compare white racists, on the other hand, with on the other end of the spectrum, those people who are strongly advocating political correctness and?
I don't compare them. In fact, I have exploited the word racialism.
Yes, you have. What's the difference in racism and racialism?
The dictionary would not agree with me, I'm sure, but I use it to define that racism, which is defensive. That is, most black races working from a lack of power, and their racism, although as insane and as dangerous, is essentially defensive. Yeah. You don't like me, so therefore I hate you as well. You know.
You recently played the Reverend Vernon Johns.
Boy.
Who was an extraordinary minister. Tell me about it, because I want to bring this back to something else you've said.
Where do I start? We just finished it. Probably the third most grueling thing I've done, in line with Great White Hope and Fences, and now the Vernon Johns story. He preceded Martin Luther King.
Three separate black men that you have portrayed.
Yeah.
On the one hand, Jack Jefferson,
two
great
real,
fighter,
one fictional.
and from Fences, Athol Few. I mean, August Wilson's film. Yeah. I mean, play. And it wasn't made to a film, was it?
Not yet. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now Vernon Johns, a movie in which you play this. Tell us who he was, because he was very close to Martin Luther King.
Yes. We don't know if they actually met. We have a scene in the movie where they do meet. Right. We accept that we might be fabricating that. That's fine.
Right.
It's important to bring those two images together. He preceded Martin in the Dexter Avenue Church in Montgomery, Alabama. He'd arrived there. He was a bohemian, well-educated and well-read man. He was a man who, when he ran out of sermons, he would give speeches on military history or the great poetry of the world, and he was great at it. I mean, the only two recordings that I know of where you fall in love with this mind and this heart of this man. And but at the same time, although he was mixed blood, he was part Scottish, and he got away with a lot of things in Montgomery, like integrating lunch counters, and people didn't know quite what he was a lot of the time, but in his heart, he was for the black people. Right. And at his church, he had confronted a whole middle-class contingent of people who were professionals and taught in colleges and so on. And he was upset that they considered they were better than other black people. And he attacked them viciously about that. He wanted them to commit. He wanted them to take the same chances in life to gain freedom and to gain rights as the black people were having to confront in terms of where they couldn't avoid it. They're on the bus every day, and they're at the separated drinking fountains every day. All the symbols, and he said, just because you have money and you have means, it doesn't mean that you can avoid those things that affect your brothers. He acted like a racialist, but he really wasn't. He was not the Al Sharpton. He was a bit of a King. He was a bit of Sharpton. He was a bit of all.
But
the.
You've contrasted him with Sharpton, and negatively for Al Sharpton.
Afraid so, yeah.
Yeah. What's the contrast?
Al has been acting like a racialist, and the only thing wrong with that is that fine for Al to think what he thinks, but a lot of young people, I think, get taken off the hook about what's really going on. To say that white man is responsible for everything is not going to leave that young person with the energy to deal with the real problems once he has cleared the table of those insane fantasies about race. Once that's clear, then he's got to really deal with life as it really is, and the Sharpton's kind of thinking doesn't leave room for that.
You know what's so fascinating for me to know where you are in having read what you have said is that I wonder two things. One, it is against what we assume to be a lot of conventional wisdom about African American thinking. I mean, you seem to be a part, and I don't know whether you are or not. That may be me stereotyping what is a conventional wisdom about what people say. Because you seem, and secondly, you seem to be willing to be as candid about what you believe of your own analysis and perspective with little regard for whether you may be ostracized, criticized by other people of your color, right?
Yeah.
I mean, have you met some opposition? Have you met, because you're known for this standing up and saying what you believe, has it brought you any criticism?
I hope to get back to the Vernon Johns thing in a minute.
Okay.
But to answer your question, it started very early. And it started in frivolous ways. I mean, I was doing a production of The Emperor Jones,
right,
written by O'Neill, a great play with a stereotypical character in it named Jones. And the play uses the word nigger. And we did this production in Boston, and I confronted my first picket line. Right. Some group claiming to have the blessings of the NAACP picketed us for the use of the word nigger. And that began a chain reaction. The productions I found interesting often were not politically correct. And I said, hey, I accept it. I'm not going to... Sidney Poitier once asked me when I did a play called Neighbors for Channel 13, and it was banned by the NAACP because my character, who was a black musician, resisted moving out of Harlem to join his wife, who wanted to live in Scarsdale. And his reason was, if I move out of Harlem, I might lose whatever that stuff is that allows me to create this music I create. Yeah. And the NAACP said, well, that's not what we want to hear these days. We want to hear about upward mobility. We want to hear about the black man insisting on going to Scarsdale. And I said, well, that's not what the play's about. It got banned. I starred in it with Gene Hackman and Beverly Todd and a young lady played Gene's wife. I think you forget her name now. It was a wonderful production, but never seen. And Sidney asked me, he said, well, why do you contribute your energies to things that are controversial? And I said, it wasn't controversial when I read it, and it became so, but am I to back out? Anyway. Yeah. But that began a chain reaction of me being at my own drum beat. Right. And often,
But you wouldn't be comfortable any other way, would you? Listening to your own drum beat.
I would have enjoyed playing the Robeson that Avery Brooks now plays. Right. He plays, as far as I know, the same words, the same play that I played, without any controversy.
But it was controversial when you did it?
For a lot of odd reasons that I won't try to go into. I try to cover it in the book.
I know Paul Robeson Jr. and all that. Yeah.
It became the politically incorrect thing of the decade. That production that we did. Yeah. It was attacked from all sides. Anyway.
Yeah.
I would have enjoyed playing that because the role itself was challenging enough, and the form was as inadequate as it was still challenging, and I would have enjoyed playing that without the controversy.
But without knowing, before I read this, you and Paul Robeson seem to have certain essential qualities. You know, powerful, commanding presence.
It's very curious.
Voice.
Because when we realized that we could not use Paul's own voice for the songs, we fantasized that we could. You know, that was not legal or possible. Lloyd Richards, who had then taken over the production, said, he said, well, there's one area where you can hold your own as Paul Robeson, and that is acting. He said, so don't worry about the singing. we won't let you sing, but act. Play Paul the actor. He says, you can hold your own there, you know. And I think I met Paul through my father, and there is a similar vocal timbre that my father shares, that Paul Robeson shares, that I share. I think Jeffrey Holder shares, you know. But the natural bass sound,
and that all of us are envious of.
I don't know. It doesn't work all the time. The low sounds often get lost in the air.
Yeah. Back to Vernon Johns, only because you wanted to remember one more time who Vernon Johns was in this film that's coming out, I guess, on TNT. You asked me, did you want to come back to that? So I
just to try to define him, he was a man who was very much for black people, but there was one occasion wherein there was a kind of a no good kid. He would not defend a black person just because he was black.
Oh, right.
There was one kid who was really a ne'er-do-well, as they said in those days, but whose family had enough money to be members of this church, and they insisted on a church funeral. He said, no, I will not give this rascal a church funeral. And they insisted. And he got up and said, in his robes, and at the funeral, he said, this young man lived life. He went around Montgomery daring somebody to cut his throat. Somebody obliged him. He lived like a dog. He died like a dog. Undertaker claimed the body. He was a brusque man. He was a frank man. He was a fearless man. He did things like that, and he antagonized a lot of people. He was rarely politically correct, and they kicked him out and hired Martin Luther King.
They kicked him out and brought Martin Luther King in. Yeah.
They said we need somebody more manageable.
And then that led to
the what we know as the Civil Rights
Revolution. Yeah. What did you think of Malcolm X?
When I came out of the Army, I heard him saying, "Get your shotguns." I thought everybody had their shotguns already, and that's the only thing that impressed me about Malcolm. I wondered why he didn't go to the South with that message, where King was. You know, there's something always. The more radical northern activists rattle their swords only in the north. It bothered me that he didn't go down there and rattle. I think there was one occasion when the KKK invited him down there because they loved him. They loved the separatist idea. I frankly thought that the separatist idea was stupid. But otherwise, he was a great man. I thought in the early days when he was following Elijah Muhammad's concept of the separate, carving out the separate black nation within America, I said, how stupid can you be? You know, ghettoize yourself again. Otherwise, the Muslims that I have met are doing something that black people often find impossible. That is the bootstraps to get themselves going in life, in spite of the problems. You know? And I think what Malcolm was attracted by, in the chance to not wait for a white man to do right, but simply to move the race ahead, you know.
To do for yourself.
And that's still the project.
And to instill your own sense of self-esteem and pride for who you are and the values you stand for.
Yeah. He did it in drastic ways by counting all white people as the blue-eyed devil and so on, which he began to. I think he saw the wisdom very early on, but that was expedient. And when he began to say otherwise, that's when he became dangerous to a lot of people.
And probably led to his death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When
he threatened to be really effective nationwide, then he scared any number of people. including the CIA and people like that. So it's hard to tell because of that who really killed him.
Yeah.
They were all interested in killing him.
And then when you think about what might have been because of such enormous talent,
I think about what might have been with all those slaughters. I think those slaughters, which includes the two Kennedy brothers, King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, those were acts of the devil, And I don't mean in a religious sense, but acts of the most evil part that man is capable of, and the most evil drive that man is capable of. And that put this country in a dark hole and is not recovered. I think the Clinton movement was one small step out of that hole, but we still can't see light. We're in such a dark hole because of those slaughters.
Because of all that it brought in terms of what Vietnam and Watergate
and where it compromised us as people, us as
opportunities to make the transition to a newer time.
Yeah,
how it compromised us as Americans.
Yeah, we were asked to swallow that crap, swallow the lies, swallow the untruths. So now it's really hard to sort it out. It doesn't help to jump onto all these conspiracy theories, but we know that something went wrong, and we were dished a whole bunch of crap. We haven't gotten over it.
A whole bunch. Go ahead.
You have to regurgitate that kind of stuff. You can't digest it, and the regurgitation hasn't started to happen yet. I hope it's not violent.
You mean you can't accept it as random acts of violence?
No. Even you have to accept that it's a dark time, even on a psychic level. Yeah. Even if you don't blame it on anybody, it's a dark time that has to be corrected by human beings. It can't be supported by human beings, and it was supported by human beings.
And when you say we haven't recovered from it, and the Clinton administration may be some small step,
just a gesture to try to peek out of the hole again, and. It's not surprising that all these things are happening around the world, and we tend to be caught off guard by it.
You mean the end of communism, the tearing down of the wall, Middle East peace just yesterday?
Because life has to move on, and we have been. I mean, when Russia was defined as the evil empire, that was really a definition of us, and we haven't seen the light on that yet, And we tend to be in a certain dark age ourselves, and the world is hopefully improving, certainly changing around us, and we seem to be in our own dark ages.
Yeah, but in many ways, the values that the values and the principles that seem to be the fuel that drives these engines come from what some of us would consider American values, whether it's democracy, which we
the ones that are not practiced here.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Exactly.
I mean, the founding fathers set up some great values, and they're now being recognized all over the world.
Are you optimistic?
But it's not capitalism that's winning out; it's democracy that's winning out.
No, I
understand. We tend to confuse the two things,
Capitalism and democracy.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, or the marketplace. But at the same time, I mean, that's where there is also the movement in terms of Eastern Europe, as well as towards democracy and towards struggling with the notion of how do you create democratic institution. There's also the rush to the marketplace, believing that it has done more for those societies.
There's nothing more stimulating than to give an individual the right to better his life, and not to wait for the whole society.
And it's identified with the respect for the individual and his opportunity or her opportunity to make the best of themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you look back, back to where your career that was hard for you in this book, after Great White Hope, you went on and made that a film. You went on you made a series of television programs. Paris is one. Gabriel's Fire. What was Gabriel's what?
Gabriel's Fire. That was a TV failed.
Which you want failed television series. A series of movies, Claudine, which you loved, Field of Dreams, which you loved. A series of other roles. Is there any sense in your part, as you wrote this, that I wish I had gone here rather than here? Or do you look at this life that you have lived and these gifts that you have had and say, look?
I would have accepted much less.
You would have?
Yeah, happily.
Not a part of you, though, says the fire that was in the Great White Hope, the fire that was in Othello, did not have enough coming forward to give these great talents an opportunity to flourish and be none of that.
If I can take that feeling up to the point of bitterness. I don't think bitterness serves anything.
I don't either. But I mean, it's not bitter, but some sense that I wish there had been more.
That's what my father probably has always said. Looking at my career or Matthew's career,
right.
That if I had had those opportunities, boy, where I would be,
yeah.
you know. And that's what each generation probably says about every generation.
Your father may have said about himself, and
yeah,
if he had your opportunity, maybe he would have.
I think, but that happens with every generation and every culture.
Yeah.
If I had the chances you had, kid, I'd be boom out there. Yeah.
Do the talents that you have? Tell me what you think they are.
I'm not sure. I think acting is great only when it happens. There are no great actors. There are actors who are efficient and good at it, who will once in a while do great things, but that doesn't define anybody as great actors. You know, I think when you are most accurate, when you are most clear in your work, is when you are come close to being great, and it's nothing automatic about it.
How many times have you been great?
Well, I felt great in The Great White Hope. I felt great in Fences. And I felt great in Lenny and Mice and Men.
Yeah. In which you were using your skills to the maximum.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was calling
If it wasn't great, it was the best I could do. You know,
but it was great. It was
yeah.
great. And everybody recognized it for great. And I mean, I guess I'm struggling with this notion of have those skills, and maybe that's the way life is. You only have so many opportunities to give full flight to all that you.
It's certainly, it's a common phenomenon in theater. I mean, in movies and theater, not many of us have a whole lot of shots at it. You know.
Yeah. And there are few people that have any real control over their destiny.
Very few, right? And that's to be accepted.
Yeah.
That's part of the reality of this business. An actor never knows from one day to the next what the next job will be, and that's as it should be.
It is. Why? Because vulnerability ought to be part of the.
Oh no. Well, in a way, yeah. Because you know, if you observe some of the back in the 50s and 60s, some of the European theater, where each increment, each step was designed, was set in by the state theater. An actor would start out as an apprentice, and the next year he'd get better jobs and so on. Eventually he'd be the star, whether he had any talent or not.
Yeah.
That was not a good system either, even though it ensured work, it was a good guarantee and so on.
Yeah.
It was not always the answer.
This may be a silly now point, but you know, you are now, most of the roles that I see you do have nothing to do with color of skin.
It's a trend. I think black actors want to use their energies to address some of the great lives, like Denzel had a chance to do the Malcolm that many of us wanted to do.
Yeah. You wanted to do that Malcolm.
Oh, Billy D. Williams and I were both scheduled to do it at some point or other.
Yeah, and it never made it to.
No, or the Nat Turner that was so messed over. I hope somebody gets to do that. Yeah. And we all want to do that, but we also want to enjoy just acting.
Right. And he's getting actually the role he's doing now for the Grisham thing.
We all want to break those barriers.
Do you still want to do this Hemingway?
Yeah, I do.
What why do you?
Well, I laugh because I don't know yet whether I want to do it in so-called whiteface or just do it as me. When I have a beard on, I'm not too unlike Hemingway. You know, a beard and a good gut. You know, and you know. That long billed cap, I can do it, and I think I understand him.
You think you understand him?
I think I do, yeah. And that's
you think you share something with him?
Yeah, I think so.
What is it?
Well, I have a photo on the wall, taken by Kosh, the great photographer.
Your chef Kosh.
He was trying to capture what he called the sensitivity in Hemingway, and he did capture it.
And you think you see it too, as well as the force.
Yeah. In spite of all that macho image that he.
Voices and Silences by James Earl Jones, written with Penny Niven, is a look at a man's life and time in the theater and film, and I thank you.
Thank you
very much. All right. James Earl Jones, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.